Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We have the pleasure of presenting David Gugick with CloudBerry. Please give him a warm welcome.
6 people, I love it. Come on, everybody pay attention. All right, so welcome everybody. We're going to take a little time to talk a little bit about Amazon S3 for backup. My name is David Gugick. I'm the VP of Product Management at CloudBerry, and then we'll just show you a couple slides at the end about what CloudBerry can do for you in the backup and disaster recovery area with Amazon S3. And then I have a few t-shirts at the end, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand at the end. I think we'll save them just so we don't have to pass around the mic during the presentation. And I have a few t-shirts to give away as well. So why is backup becoming a challenge for a lot of our customers out there? One reason is data growth. I mean, if you've been reading any of the reports from any of the analysts, Gartner, IDC, they're telling you that your data is doubling in size every 18 to 24 months. And data is also now everywhere. It used to be confined to the data center, but now it's on your laptops, it's on your tablets, it's all for your remote workers working from home. So there's a lot of data out there. It's growing very quickly, and as the hard drive space, it becomes cheaper and cheaper, and storage is cheaper and cheaper. What we find is people tend to keep a lot more things. Another reason is regulatory and legal. If you have a need to keep things for a certain number of years, if you're a United States company, the IRS might tell you to keep it for 7. You may have legal requirements to do a legal hold on certain amounts of data. All of these things can contribute to keeping a lot of data for backup. User-requested restores. This is something that we see a lot now. Users have become very accustomed to calling up the help desk and saying, I need this file back. I made a mistake. We deleted something we shouldn't have. Please get it back. And they want it back immediately. They don't want to wait days for it. So having the capability to restore user files means you have to be backing them up, and you have to have that capability to do the restore. And the last reason is really disaster. And things like malware. We've all seen ransomware attacks recently. Whoops, sorry. Moving around here. Sorry, I'm trying to get my mouse here. Ransomware attacks have become something of pretty common lately. And one thing about ransomware attacks is that if your backup data is available on the network, where the ransomware is running crazy, you might find that all of your backups are now encrypted and unavailable. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll be able to pay the ransom, or maybe you can decrypt those files, but that's not the case usually. So having your backup files in an area where things like ransomware can't see them, the cloud is really a perfect place for that. So putting your backup files in something like Amazon S3 can really facilitate keeping those backups safe from any kind of malware attack. So why use Amazon S3? Well, we think one reason to use Amazon S3 is really the first thing you can do is reduce your costs. So your CapEx, capital expenditures, your OpEx, your operating expenditures, these kinds of things are very costly. Keeping all these archive storage systems around, old disk arrays around, NAS and SAN you might be using for the purposes of backup can be very expensive, not only to maintain from a staff perspective, but also an energy perspective, and moving things to Amazon S3 can really help there. Simplified planning and growth, the kind of capacity planning that you would do for your on-prem data center, where you have to understand your growth in order to requisition new hardware to support all of the backups you need, is something that you don't need to do quite to that same level with Amazon S3. There's unlimited storage available in the Amazon S3 region, so you don't really have to understand exactly how much you're going to grow. Probably a good idea to know how much you're going to grow so you can manage your expenses and costs for storage, but you don't have to worry about planning to the same level. And then eliminating your legacy software and hardware. So if you have old tape systems out there, old legacy arrays that are being used for the purposes of backup, those old systems can sometimes be retired and saving you quite a bit of money. So let's talk a little bit about the Amazon S3 storage classes that are available. Everybody's heard of S3. It's one of the oldest services available from Amazon AWS. And S3 Standard is what most people use. This is your general purpose storage. This is for your frequently accessed files where if you need them back, the latency is very fast. Millisecond level latency, meaning you're going to be able to get those files back immediately upon request. It's very durable, meaning that it's not likely that those files are ever going anywhere. With 11 nines, that's a lot of nines. That means the likelihood of ever losing a file in S3 is statistically close to 0. And 4 nines of availability. That means the S3 service will be up and available when you need it. Now, you may have heard of an old service called reduced redundancy storage. This is still offered by Amazon, and it does remove one of the replicas with what used to be a cost savings. And I think, as you'll see when we talk about infrequent access coming up, the S3 infrequent access has taken the place of RRS, reduced redundancy storage. And I think if you look at some of the prices for RRS, you'll find that they're not even lower in some regions than standard S3. What you're going to pay is going to depend a little bit on the region, but in the East Coast region, which I use sort of as the example here, you pay about 2.3 cents per gigabyte. Now there is an egress charge, so you're going to pay to get that data out, and it's somewhere 8.5 cents per gigabyte. But the idea behind backups is that you want to have them available if you need to restore, but you're not going to be doing nearly the level of restores that you're going to do from the backup side. Now we move on to S3 infrequent access. And S3 IA is for your longer lived data that's accessed less frequently. Access is still very fast. It's in the millisecond range. They still get the same durability and availability that you get in S3 standard. There's a much lower cost per gigabyte, but there is a retrieval fee, so you're going to pay a little bit of money to get that back. Now, something to keep in mind with infrequent access is that you're dealing with a lot of very small files that could affect your overall charges. There is a 128 kilobyte minimum object size, so even if your object is smaller than that, you're storing a lot of 16K objects up there, you're going to pay as though they were 128 kilobytes each. So just be aware that if you're dealing with a lot of small files, that you need to know that that might affect your overall cost. Minimum storage duration is 30 days. That doesn't mean you have to leave the files there for 30 days, but it does mean that if you put a 1 terabyte file up in infrequent access and you delete it after a day, you're going to be charged as though it were there for the full 30 days. So that's why we say less frequently accessed, but longer lived. And you can see the costs here, about 12.5 cents in the East region per gigabyte. So that's close to half the price of S3 standard. And if you're storing a lot of data, that can be pretty significant in the amount that you're saving. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that there is a retrieval fee beyond the normal egress charges for S3, and that's about 1 cent per gigabyte. So once you retrieve the data once, all of it, you're pretty close to the S3 standard cost, right? Once you retrieve it a second time, you could go over. So just be aware that if it's data you think you're going to need to access very frequently and possibly over and over again, that IA may not be the best choice. And then, of course, we've all heard of Amazon Glacier. This is your long-term archive storage. It's for very infrequent access with latency that's currently minutes or hours. So we're talking 4 to 6 hours for your standard retrieval, meaning the objects won't be available for an average of that amount of time. So definitely not a place for something that you need to access right away. Even with expedited retrieval, you're talking about a wait time of 1 to 5 minutes, so certainly not in the millisecond range like you get with S3 standard. Now, there is some storage overhead with Glacier for those objects that are migrated from S3. There's about an 8K overhead for an S3 object and about 32 kilobytes of data per Glacier object. That's metadata that's stored up there. But you can see the charges are very inexpensive. That's roughly 1/6 the cost of S3 standard. There is a standard retrieval fee is 1 cent per gigabyte, and then if you want to pay a little bit more, it's 3 cents per gigabyte for expedited retrieval. So how are you going to manage moving all these objects around? Last thing you want to be doing is logging into your AWS control panel, right-clicking on objects and changing the storage class. So what Amazon makes available to you is object lifecycle policies. These policies allow you to move the data very easily from storage classes from S3 to IA to Glacier or any desired what I call downstream storage class movement. You're not going to be able to move the objects back out of Glacier, back to like IA or S3, so you're moving in that direction always. You can create as many policies as you want. You can create filters and prefixes to move certain types of data and not move other types of data, and does help eliminate a lot of mistakes and simplifies your administration. Now let's talk a little bit about encrypting those backups. Now, I always tell everybody that if you're doing backups, they should be encrypted at the client level. So at the server, you should be using AES 256 encryption, but Amazon does offer the option for using server-side encryption. It's free and very easy to use. It does protect your data at rest, meaning that when Amazon gets the data, it's going to encrypt it right in the S3 bucket using what's usually your own key built into your account. It does use AES 256, which is about as secure as you get these days. As I mentioned, there's really three different options. There's an S3 managed encryption key, and this is great because it's just a checkbox. I want to use server-side encryption. Amazon manages all that for you. Should somebody ever break into an Amazon data center and get access to your backup files, they would still be encrypted, right? So they're encrypted in place, which is nice. But there are also options for customer-provided and AWS key management keys. So if you have compliance reasons or you need to manage keys yourself, you do have those options. And as I mentioned earlier, just continue to use your backup encryption with your product. I don't think server-side encryption is a replacement for doing regular backup encryption. Now, what if you need increased redundancy and fault tolerance? There's an option for cross-region replication that you can set up in S3. And what it does is it just migrates migrate's not the right term, it replicates your data from one S3 region to another. So that increases your fault tolerance and redundancy, and it can help you comply with any stringent regulatory requirements you have. It also allows you to change the storage classes, which is nice. So if you're backing up this S3 standard, you want to move things to infrequent access, you can certainly do that with the replication setup. Now, it only migrates new objects. Existing objects will have to be manually copied, so just keep that in mind if you're using replication. And it does require versioning, which I think is a whole other topic, which I won't get into here. But S3 versioning will be enabled automatically if you set up replication on a particular bucket. And if you're using a backup product, make sure that it can work with version buckets, because what you don't want to end up with is a lot of copies of your backup files that are just sitting there and getting versioned over and over again, because that could add to your storage costs. So how do you get started when you're a big environment? You have tens of terabytes or even petabytes of data. One option is AWS SNOWBALL, and that can help you import all of this data, seed it, is sometimes the term we use, in just a matter of days. So if you have 10 petabytes of data and pushing all that information over the internet is not really going to be a good option for you, what you can do is effectively order a SNOWBALL device. This is a small appliance and a ruggedized, tamper-resistant container. It's tamper-proof. It uses AES 256 with the TPM module. It's a little appliance that they send to you. You can back up directly to it and send it back to Amazon, and then they'll migrate all the data off the SNOWBALL appliance into your account to get you seeded. So you don't have to worry about spending 60 days and chewing up your entire internet bandwidth to get that multi-petabyte environment pushed up. The other thing you can use is transfer acceleration. If you have a need to back up to a Amazon region, if you're a global company, if you may be a United States company and you want all of the backup data in the United States, it's not always the easiest thing to do to back up, say, from the EU or from South America directly to the US, because you may find that the latency is pretty high and the performance isn't good. What you can do is use something like transfer acceleration. This is just an option, and your backup product may or may not support it. Hopefully it does, and it allows you to route the data through all of the Amazon edge locations that are kind of all over the planet. So it'll facilitate taking the data locally and pushing it out to the remote region, which is really helpful. Now, there is a small cost for that. It could be up to about 4 cents per gigabyte, but that's for edge locations in the US, Europe, and Japan. Other locations are going to have different costs. There's a little example, I don't know if you can see down at the bottom, but I'll say I pretended I was a Japanese-based company, and I said, how quickly could I back up my data from my office in the US to Tokyo with and without transfer acceleration. And this is an S3 transfer acceleration speed comparison tool that's on the AWS site. And you can see that using transfer acceleration resulted in speeds that were 1,741% faster. So that can make all the difference in being able to back up from a remote region to the region where you want that data to reside. So if you back up a disaster recovery features that you may find important, as we start to talk a little bit more about CloudBerry and features of backup or file and image level backups. So you may want to back up just your endpoints, back up the important files, but you may have servers out there that you want to be able to recover in their entirety using bare metal recovery, or to restore to something like an EC2 instance in order to get up and running quickly without having to re-image a new server before you can restore the important files. Hybrid backup allows you to back up locally and to the cloud at the same time. This can be really helpful for restores because you have your backups locally for fast restores, but they're also protected in the cloud away from ransomware and great for disaster recovery. File level restore, to be able to restore those files, there's end user files to restore from image or file-based backups. Compression and deduplication, well, they just serve to restore, reduce the amount of storage, reduce the bandwidth that you're using, and reduce your storage costs. We already talked a lot about encryption. Incremental and block level backups can just speed everything up. Synthetic full backups are really important to be able to synthesize a full backup. To synthesize a full backup from the bits that are already in S3 storage. So this can allow you to effectively do a full backup without having to push that data all up to S3. Object lifecycle management. Things like multi-part uploading and multi-threading and bandwidth management controls to make sure that the right type of data is pushed up at the right time. You don't want your backups chewing up all your internet during business hours, so it helps to have a product out there that can do bandwidth management. So let me just wrap up with this slide. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The CloudBerry booth is just kind of few bits down that way. I think it's 5:30. We provide cloud-based backup and recovery. We can do a lot of the things that we talked about in this presentation. So please come by the booth if you have any questions or want to see a demo. If anybody has any questions now, I do have some t-shirts up there. I'm happy to give them out. And once again, thanks for attending. Appreciate it.